have plagiarized some of the sermons of some of his fellow Unitarian Universalist ministers, and he got into big trouble for this. He was forced to resign as minister of his church, basically drummed out of his church. I'm not sure if he was completely defellowshipped as a minister or not. I'm not sure about that. But essentially, he was subjected to quite strong disciplinary action for his misconduct. And the reason, of course, is because his victims were clergy. You know, he made the mistake of doing something which got up the backs of his fellow ministers, because they were the, in quotation marks, victims, you know. So these Unitarian Universalist ministers who were victims of his plagiarism made darn sure that he came to regret it. But when it comes to sexual misconduct, oh, well, that's another matter. You know, if a minister runs off with the wife of one of the parishioners, you know, or if the minister has multiple affairs with members of his congregation, whether they're married or not, and so on, you know, basically they just turn a blind eye to it as much as possible. You know, some prominent ministers have done exactly that. They've seduced the wife of a congregant and dumped their own wife and married the wife of the congregant. And yes, some people squawked. Some people said this wasn't right. Some people put up a fuss. Not so many ministers, I should say. These were like ordinary church members who did this. In fact, now that I think about it, when I look at what various Unitarian Universalist ministers said about this particular case, they basically played it down. You know, they basically tried to pretend that it was acceptable. Meanwhile, about a third of this minister's congregation wanted him to resign, but, you know, only a third. The other 2/3 didn't care. The other 2/3, this guy's, thank you, sir, congregation, really didn't seem to care that he had seduced the wife of one of his congregants, unceremoniously dumped his first wife, and married the other woman. So you know, this is the kind of thing that's been going on for decades in the Unitarian Universalist Church. Only the most serious cases of clergy sexual misconduct are treated with a moderate level of seriousness, and it's really more a question of you know, if you get caught doing something criminal, and you're reported to the police, well, then it's kind of out of the hands of the church authorities. There's only so much they can do to protect the minister once it's in the hands of the court system. But right up to that point, the Unitarian Universalist Association, you know, will try to protect the minister. There's clear evidence which shows that there was an attempt to have the victims of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, who raped teenage Tibetan refugees who he had lured to his parish in Northborough and Westborough areas of Massachusetts. He actually had 2 parishes that he was handling. This man, this minister, you know, went to India, persuaded the parents of these teenage Tibetan refugees that, you know, if they put them in his care, that he would bring them to America and make sure that they got an education and everything, you know, have a better life in America. Well, they got an education, all right, but they were repeatedly raped for a period measured in years in at least one case. And when one of them finally essentially ran away and then told some of the parishioners about what was happening, there was an attempt to have these rape victims, or at least one of them, sign confidentiality agreements that would have silenced them, and which of course would have meant that it would never have been reported to the police by these victims. If they had signed the confidentiality agreements regarding being raped, otherwise sexually abused by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, well, that would have prevented them from reporting the crimes to the police. And what happened is they did, or at least one of them told some parishioners of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's parish, I'm not sure which one. Actually, I just can't remember specifically which one, but I can easily refresh my memory about which exact parish we're talking about, whether it was Northborough or Westborough. So what happened is about 4 or 5, I believe it was 5, certainly not more than 5 as I understand it, of these women who had been told about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's sexual abuse and rape of teenage Tibetan refugees decided that, the best thing to do was to report this to the police and let the police handle it. And that's what they did. And in doing so, they made it impossible to keep it secret anymore. They made it impossible for the girls to sign confidentiality agreements that would have kept everything, hush hush. And the few members of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's congregation who did the right thing by reporting these sex crimes to the police were ostracized by their fellow congregants. Many, if not most of their fellow congregants were very angry at them for reporting Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell to the police and, failing to protect him from these nasty rape victims who were accusing him of rape. Being a little bit sarcastic there and referencing nasty women, yes. It was the Montreal Vigil in solidarity of the Women's March on Washington yesterday. Quite a good turnout, a few thousand at least. I saw one estimate of 2,000, which I think was low, and I saw another estimate of 8,000 to 10,000, which may have been a little on the high side, but certainly some thousands of Montrealers, not just women, came out yesterday to attend a rally, vigil, in solidarity with the March on Washington. So, let's see here, we're coming up to the end of the first half hour. Yeah, I got maybe 4 minutes of video left here. So, there goes my bag for the picket signs. Oh, that's great. Went on to church property a little further than I would like. Strictly speaking, I'm not supposed to go on church property, but I think I just quickly snatched back my bag here. Shouldn't be a problem unless Montreal Unitarians want to be very anal retentive about things, but they've already proven that many times. Brought actually false accusations against me with the police on numerous occasions. So I could see Montreal Unitarians making an issue of the fact that I just retrieved my bag by stepping onto the property by a few feet. Let's see here. Okay, I've got a few minutes left. Yeah, this brings up something interesting. Unitarian Universalist clergy regularly trespass on property, block entrances to buildings as part of their ersatz civil disobedience. They do this deliberately. Well, you love coming to a church that wallows in hypocrisy, sir. Congratulations. And you come to a church that's totally complicit in misuse of blasphemy law to cover up and hide pedophilia and rape, so I guess that makes you complicit too, sir. So this guy says, I love coming here. Well, good for him. Yeah, he loves coming to a hypocritical church. Lots of people love going to hypocritical churches. He's not the only one. It's not even the only hypocritical church in the world. Just one of the more stunningly hypocritical ones. Anyway, getting back to civil disobedience, or alleged or basically fake posturing civil disobedience. Unitarian Universalists support their ministers trespassing on property, blocking entrances to, let's say, government buildings or embassies and so on in protests in order to get themselves arrested so that they can claim to be, engaging in civil disobedience when they're really doing no such thing, because they're not disobeying a law that they disagree with. I don't think they disagree with trespassing laws and so on. In fact, they'd be the first to enforce them if the trespassing was against them. Now, this is basically fake civil disobedience that Unitarian Universalist ministers engaged in just so that they can get the photo op and perhaps the media report of being arrested during a protest. They deliberately do minor criminal acts, misdemeanors, in order specifically to get arrested and say, oh, I was arrested, I'm the great hero of being arrested, Meanwhile, if I step on to the property of the Unitarian Church of Montreal by just a few feet, you can be darn sure that they'd make a fuss about it. So, this fellow showing up here. Yes, a long-time attendee of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and doing his best to pretend nothing's wrong, just like most of the other, if not I should say all of the other members do. Anyway, we're pretty well done here. This is it. We're going to start up a fresh reel soon. Let's have a last look at that